Greetings. The last time we had Jesus' episode in the temple at the age of 12. Today, well, just getting to the subtext now rather than repeating it. Subtext: Death of Joseph, Jesus and Mary in Capernaum. As the time drew near for Jesus to begin his mission of teaching, I saw him ever more solitary and meditative. And toward the same time, the 30th year of Jesus, Joseph began to decline. I saw Jesus and Mary often with him. Mary sometimes sat on the ground by his couch or upon a low, round, three-legged stool, which served also for a table. I seldom saw them eating, but when they did, or brought some refreshment to Joseph's bedside, it consisted of 3 white, rather long, 4-cornered pieces about 2 fingers in breadth that lay side by side on a little plate, and I also saw some little fruits in a dish. They gave him something to drink out of a mug. When Joseph was dying, Mary sat at the head of his bed, holding him in her arms. Jesus stood just below her, near Joseph's breast. The whole room was brilliant with light and full of angels. After his death, his hands were crossed on his breast. He was wrapped from head to foot in a white, winding sheet, laid in a narrow casket, and placed in a very beautiful tomb, the gift of a good man. Only a few men followed the coffin with Jesus and Mary, but I saw it accompanied by angels and environed with light. Joseph's remains were afterwards removed by the Christians to Bethlehem and interred. I think I can still see him lying there incorrupt. Joseph had of necessity to die before the Lord, for he could not have endured his crucifixion. He was too gentle, too loving. He had already suffered much from the persecution Jesus had had to support from the malice of the Jews from his 20th to his 30th year, for they could not bear the sight of him. Their jealousy often made them exclaim that the carpenter's son thought he knew everything better than others, that he was frequently at variance with the teachings of the Pharisees, and that he always had around him a crowd of young followers. Mary never ceased to suffer from these persecutions. Such pains always seemed to me sharper than those of martyrdom. Unspeakable was the love with which Jesus in his youth bore the jealous persecution of the Jews. After Joseph's death, Jesus and Mary removed to a little village only a few houses between Capernaum and Bethsaida. A man named Levi, who was very much attached to the Holy Family, had given Jesus a house there in which to dwell. It stood alone, surrounded by a ditch of standing water. A couple of Levi's people also were in the house in the capacity of servants, and Levi himself supplied all necessaries from Capernaum. It was to this little place that Peter's father retired when he gave over to him the fishery of Bethsaida. Jesus had already many followers among the young people of Nazareth, but they were not faithful to him. He walked with them in the country around the lake and went up to Jerusalem with them for the feasts. The Lazarus family in Bethany were already acquainted with the Holy Family. The Pharisees of Nazareth were against Jesus. They called him a vagrant. Levi gave him that house that he might without fear of disturbance live in it and gather his followers around him. There was on the lake around Capernaum a region of extraordinarily fertile and charming valleys. There were several harvests during the year and uncommonly beautiful leaves, blossoms, and fruits all at the same time. Many distinguished Jews had gardens and castles there, Herod among their number. The Jews of Jesus' time were no longer like their fathers. Through commerce and their contact with pagans, they had become very corrupt. One never saw the women in public nor at work in the fields, excepting the very poorest gleaning smears of corn. They were to be seen only on pilgrimages to Jerusalem and other holy places. Husbandry and all kinds of traffic were carried on mostly through slaves. I have seen all the cities of Galilee, where now scarcely 3 villages are in existence. There were then almost 100 and an innumerable crowd of people. Mary Cleophas, who with her 3rd husband, the father of Simeon of Jerusalem, dwelt in Anne's house near Nazareth, afterward removed with her boy Simeon to Mary's in Nazareth. The rest of her family and her servants remained at Anne's. When Jesus a short time after went from Capernaum by way of Nazareth to the region of Hebron, he was accompanied by Mary as far as Nazareth, where she awaited his return. She was always so solicitous about him. There came also to comfort the Holy Family on the death of Joseph to see Jesus again, Joseph Barsabas, the son of Mary Cleophas, by her 2nd marriage with Sabas, and the 3 sons of her 1st marriage with Alphaeus, Simon, James the Less, and Thaddeus, all 3 of whom already carried on business away from home. They had had no close communication with Jesus since his childhood. They knew in general of Simeon's and Anne's prophecies on the occasion of his presentation in the temple, but they attached no importance to them. They preferred to follow John the Baptist, who soon after passed through these parts. And that is the end of the reading and in the ending of a major part in the book. We're now arriving to Jesus' ministry, which is the next big section of the book. And obviously, I went through half of this book, and it's not even half because a lot of it was like introduction on who Anne Catherine was. So really, I'll probably end up spending the rest of the year just finishing the first book out of 3. So that's how many there are. All right, so we have some notes, or I do. In Mystical City, there was always a discrepancy in the age of Joseph. Mary of Agreda claimed that he was in his 33rd year when he married Mary, but this book claimed he was in his middle ages, I think 45 or something like that. Mary of Agreda then claimed that Jesus was 27 or in his 27th year when he passed on, while this book claims that Mary was in his 30th year, or not Mary, but Jesus was in his 30th year. This is not a serious discrepancy, just a deviation on minor things. Next note, Joseph dies like a lot of saints die, at a bed with people he loves surrounding him, and then they end up seeing Mary, Jesus, and the angels right before they pass on. A lot of saints have died like this. So maybe we should say that the saints that did pass on like this, they died and I'm talking saints like St. Bernadette, Subiru, or St. Francis of Assisi. When they die a death like this, we might call it a St. Joseph's death, since he was the first to have undergone it this way. Next note. Notice that when St. Joseph passed on, people were shifting house to house, not really trading properly, but just using it to hook people up. Like, hey, I got an open house here. You guys can take over that. Oh, okay. And everybody, there was no property dispute. There's not whose place is this, rather than they knew whose it was, and those people didn't mind their houses being used, probably because their land ended up getting tended, or it wasn't really tended, or maybe they had slaves there, but I don't know. This concept, though, of just like sharing properties just because it's open, it's utterly foreign to us now. Whenever people have open property, rent, give me money, give me money, give me money. Well, for a large part, because we live in a generally Freemasonic society, and there's a lot more to elaborate on that. First of all, our dwellings aren't built to last. So your roof, for example, always has a shelf life, if you have shingles, about 30 years, if that. Unless you live in the south, you're lucky to have a ceramic roof, in which case, well, it lasts a lot longer. Even metal roofs don't last forever. But hardened clay and stone roof, unless they were built to stainless steel, maybe. But hardened clay and stone roofs are pretty much permanent. Even now, the Holy House of Laredo is effectively what it was 2,000 years ago, just miraculously moved. Second of all, even when we have dwellings, we do not have near the familiarity with other people, especially nowadays, our own relatives, to do this, whereas for them, they didn't seem to think much of it at all. And there's a complaint people are having towards the boomers, the boomer parents. They would rather their children live on the street and make while they get rich off their properties, right? Then a lot of boomer parents, they don't want to give their money to their kids when they die. And I guess I get where the boomer parents are coming from, because when they call millennials entitled brats, that's about what they are. See, this is the side you don't hear about. Millennials expect all of this to be done, so they live frivolously on purpose, because they're like, oh, well, my parents have a lot of stuff, so they'll just give it to me when they die. And so they continue to act like entitled brats, like, I don't want to work. Now, I understand the whole jobless situation. I've endured it for a very long time, but I think some people are meant to endure it. But there's other people that they're more than capable of doing so. They have no special calling in their lives. They're not especially saintly, nor are they especially intelligent. They probably should be laboring, and women should be marrying men and laboring their affairs, but that's dead now too. But yeah, the millennials are so entitled, because if I was boomer parents and my kids were living holy lives, of course I would give stuff to them. Easy. Because I'd have that familiarity. But millennials don't have that familiarity with their parents. They criticize boomer parents, but they're nothing like them. They learn nothing from them. They think they're smarter than them. So that's just a testimony of the lack of familiarity we have with each other, even within our own blood, flesh and blood. In my family, we have a big religious divide. Some of us are Catholics, and some of us we're effectively Protestants. And that sows a huge discord. As much as people don't want to say it does. So anyways, they were just like, hey, Jesus, I got an empty house here between Bethsaida and Capernaum. Maybe you could hook you up. They're like, sure. And they would just like have them 10 properties they stayed at. Now I imagine at some places in the world, they'll still do this. Maybe the Amish communities still do it. Fact is, and it bears repeating, and this is the central point I'm trying to make here despite all of my tangents, that the more people are like you, the more you treat them as an extension of yourself. Which is why it's not good to get sea-washed by migrants, or rather that migrants be made to assimilate properly or to be segregated. And even I have my reservations about segregation. They should just not be around. Live in apartments, never be allowed to own land because they are not us, right? As soon as migrants start to take land over, take things over, the culture inevitably or imminently changes. White picket fences societies are really good at separating from their people, separating people from their faith and their convictions, creating this nominalism that is destroying the world, that is plunging it into degeneracy, which is why we know Freemasonry is straight from the devil. It's the false prophet of our time. And Freemasonry, to be free, and it's nothing more than this, okay? If you want to define Freemasonry, these are all the words you need. It's the idea that religion is personal rather than universal. That's all it is. Now, sea-washed. Last point. So I'll go on about sea-washed. When we'll meet the Samaritan woman, whose name is Dinah. I read this story sometime in. We'll meet her in the future. I don't know when, but it's the woman of John 4. She's a great example of sea-washed. The more the people of Galilee associated with pagans, even though they got wealthier from all the free trade that went on, the more lukewarm they got, the more privileged they got, the more they shirked their duties, the less catechesis they got through their hard labors. This bears absolutely no striking resemblance to our times at all, I'm sure. Anyway, that's it. Ave Maria.